Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The machinery plant hummed with rhythmic clatter as Clayton Mercer wiped sweat from his brow. 12 hours on his feet had left dark stains under his armpits and a dull ache in his lower back. He glanced at the clock, 7:43 p.m. Another day done. Heading out, Mercer. Frank, his supervisor, called from across the floor. Clayton nodded, peeling off his work gloves. See you tomorrow. You still good for that extra weekend shift? Johnson's kid is sick again. A moment's hesitation crossed Clayton's face. Delilah would be upset. She'd been planning a shopping trip with her mother. But the overtime would help with next month's mortgage payment. I'll be here, Clayton said. The drive home was quiet. No radio, just the sound of tires on asphalt. Clayton rehearsed what he would say when he walked through the door. Maybe tonight will be different. Maybe tonight they'd talk like they used to, before Maureen moved in, before the arguments became so one-sided that he'd stopped participating altogether. The house lights were on when he pulled into the driveway. From the outside, it looked like any other home on Cedar Lane, 2 stories, beige siding, a basketball hoop that Wyatt rarely used anymore. Clayton sat in his truck for a full minute, gathering himself. The moment he pushed open the front door, he knew nothing had changed. Silence. That peculiar, hostile silence that wasn't really silence at all, but the absence of welcome. Dad! Wyatt appeared at the top of the stairs, his voice quiet but hopeful. Hey, buddy. Clayton managed a smile. How was school today? Before Wyatt could answer, Delilah emerged from the kitchen, wineglass in hand. Once, the mere sight of her had made his heart race. Her honey blonde hair, those blue eyes that could flash from playful to ice-cold in seconds. Now he braced himself. You smell like a factory floor, she said, wrinkling her nose. Dinner's cold. We ate 2 hours ago. Clayton nodded. Sorry. Johnson called in. Had to finish his station. Of course he did. Delilah took a long sip from her glass. God forbid you tell them no for once. The sink is leaking again. Maureen's voice came from the living room before she appeared in the doorway. Arms crossed over her chest. Silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. Been dripping all day. Clayton opened a refrigerator. Found a plate covered in plastic wrap. I'll take a look at it. You said that last week, Maureen replied. And yet, here we are. The microwave beeped. Clayton ate, standing up, leaning against the counter while he shoveled lukewarm casserole into his mouth. He could hear the television, some reality show that Delilah and Maureen followed religiously. When he finished, he washed the plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Then he knelt under the sink with the small toolbox he kept beneath the counter. The problem was simple, a loose connection. 5 minutes with a wrench fixed it. He ran the water, checked for leaks. Nothing. Fixed, he announced to no one in particular as he walked through the living room toward the stairs. Took you long enough, Maureen muttered. Clayton paused at Wyatt's door. A sliver of light showed underneath. He knocked gently. Yeah. Clayton pushed the door open. Wyatt sat cross-legged on his bed, a book open in his lap. What are you reading? Wyatt held up the book. It's about space. The teacher said I could borrow it. Clayton stepped inside, sat on the edge of the bed. You like space stuff, huh? A shrug. It's okay. Maybe we could go to that planetarium sometime. The one over in Bristol. Wyatt's eyes brightened momentarily, then dimmed. Mom says we don't have money for trips. Clayton felt a familiar tightness in his chest. We'll figure something out. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only kind of silence Clayton found in this house anymore. Dad! Yeah, buddy. Are you and Mom okay? Clayton looked at his son, really looked at him. Wyatt had his eyes, the same deep-set brown that Clayton's father had. There was honesty in those eyes and worry. Get some sleep, Clayton said, gently taking the book and setting it on the nightstand. School tomorrow. Wyatt nodded. Understanding that non-answer for exactly what it was, Clayton showered, letting the hot water pound away at the knots in his shoulders. The bathroom mirror had fogged over, hiding his reflection when he stepped out. He was grateful for that small mercy. The bedroom was dark when he entered. Delilah's form was visible under the covers, her back to his side of the bed. Not sleeping or breathing wasn't deep enough, but pretending. That was fine with Clayton. He slid under the sheets, careful to stay on his side, maintaining the invisible border that had grown between them. He stared at the ceiling until sleep finally came, dreams of open roads and quiet cabins filling his head. Saturday arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Clayton spent the morning repairing a broken fence post in the backyard, while Delilah and Maureen drove to the mall. Wyatt helped him hold the boards, and for a brief time, things felt almost normal. "Hand me that level, buddy," Clayton said, pointing to the toolbox. Wyatt dug through the tools, pulled out the level, handed it over with careful precision. "Good job." Clayton checked the post. "Perfect. Want to help me hammer in the nails?" They worked together in peaceful companionship, the sound of hammering filling the backyard. When they finished, Clayton stepped back to admire their work. "Looks good, doesn't it?" Wyatt nodded, a small smile forming. "Yeah." By dinner time, the tension in the house had become a physical presence. Pressing down on Clayton's chest like a weight, he grilled steaks, a rare treat he'd picked up with his last paycheck, hoping to create some semblance of a family meal. Delilah opened a bottle of wine, pouring generous glasses for herself and Maureen. Wyatt poked at his food, eyes darting between the adults. "I saw Joe and Taylor at the mall today," Maureen announced, cutting into her steak. Her son just made partner at that law firm in Nashville. Clayton nodded, chewing slowly. "Making six figures now," Maureen continued, looking pointedly at Clayton. "Bought his mother a condo. Good for him," Clayton replied evenly. Delilah took a long drink from her glass. "Must be nice." "What's that?" Clayton asked, though he knew exactly what was coming. "Having a son who actually accomplishes something," Maureen answered for her daughter. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of silverware against plates. Wyatt stared at his food, not eating. "I got a promotion," Clayton said suddenly. Three pairs of eyes turned to him. "At work. More responsibility, better pay. Starting next month." It wasn't exactly a lie. Frank had mentioned the possibility last week, said Clayton was first in line when Douglas retired. "How much better?" Delilah asked, the first flicker of interest in her eyes. $3 more an hour, plus overtime opportunities. Delilah's expression fell. "That's it. That's over $6,000 a year, Delilah." $6,000. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not even enough for the bathroom renovation we've been putting off for 2 years. Clayton looked at his son, who was studying his plate with intense focus. "Wyatt, why don't you go finish that space book? We'll clean up here." Once the boy's footsteps faded upstairs, Delilah's control slipped entirely. "6,000, she repeated, louder now. "Do you have any idea what we need around here? The roof needs replacing. Wyatt needs braces. Mom needs her medication. And you come home proud of $6,000. Clayton kept his expression neutral. "It's more than we had yesterday." "It's nothing." Delilah slammed her glass down, wine sloshing over the rim. "Nothing compared to what we need. Nothing compared to what the Taylors have, or the Hendersons, or anyone else on this street. We're doing all right," Clayton said softly. "All right." Delilah's voice rose, face flushing with anger and wine. "Is that what you call this? Struggling to pay bills? Driving the same 10-year-old truck? Living in a house that's falling apart because we can't afford to fix it properly?" Maureen nodded in vigorous agreement. "My Harold would have never." "Your Harold has been dead for 8 years, Clayton cut in, a rare display of impatience. "And he left you with so much debt that Delilah and I are still paying it off." Maureen's face paled. Delilah's eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." Clayton raised an eyebrow. "Everything you've done for me?" "Yes." Delilah stood now, hands flat on the table, leaning toward him. "I gave you a son. I gave you a home. I gave you a purpose when you had nothing." Clayton remained seated, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what have I given you, Delilah?" "Nothing." The word exploded from her. "You've given this family nothing. Not love, not support, not money, nothing that matters. You come home, you sit in silence, you fix things when they break. That's not a husband. That's not a father. That's a handyman we don't have to pay." Maureen was nodding again, emboldened. "She's right, Clayton. You're a taker. Always have been." Delilah wasn't finished. Years of resentment poured out like poison. You know what Joan Taylor said to me last month? She said she never understood what I saw in you. Never understood why I married down instead of finding someone with ambition. And you know what? Neither do I anymore. Clayton looked at her, really looked at the woman he had once loved so deeply. Her beauty was still there, but it was hardened now, crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. If you had any pride left, Delilah continued, her voice dropping to a contemptuous whisper, you'd leave. Clayton felt something inside him, something that had been bending for years, finally snap clean off. The sensation wasn't pain, as he might have expected. It was relief. He looked toward the stairs, thinking of Wyatt. Then he rose from his chair, placed his napkin beside his half-eaten dinner, and walked out of the dining room without a word. He grabbed his keys from the hook. Where are you going? Delilah called after him, surprise replacing anger for a moment. Clayton didn't answer. He opened the front door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than any slam could have. No bags. No goodbye. Just a sudden, clear understanding that he was done. The first night, Clayton slept in his truck at a rest stop off Highway 75. He woke stiff and cold, but with a curious lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Delilah, but no voicemails. She was still angry then, not worried, not sorry. By noon, he'd driven to the bank in the next county over, where he'd kept a separate account since his father's death 5 years ago. The inheritance hadn't been much, just the proceeds from selling his dad's old farmhouse, but Clayton had invested it carefully, adding to it month by month with small contributions from his paycheck. Money that Delilah never knew about, his silent insurance policy against exactly what had happened. I'd like to close the account, he told the teller. Cash, please. 40 minutes later, he drove away with $23,487 in a plain envelope tucked inside his jacket. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear, that he found the cabin by accident, spotting a hand-painted for rent sign on a rural road in Campbell County. It was small, 1-bedroom, a cramped living area, kitchenette, and bath, but it was clean and came furnished. The owner, an elderly man named Vernon Miller, asked few questions beyond whether Clayton could pay first and last month's rent in cash. Job situation? Vernon had asked, counting the bills. Looking, Clayton replied. Vernon nodded. My buddy Hank runs the junkyard up on Route 63. Always needs help stripping cars. If you're interested. By the end of the first week, he had established a routine. Up at 5, coffee on the small porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. Work at the junkyard from 7 to 6, where Hank paid him in cash at the end of each day. Dinner at the diner in town, then back to the cabin to read or simply sit in the silence that now felt comforting rather than accusatory. His phone continued to buzz with notifications. The calls from Delilah became more frequent, then stopped entirely. Text messages appeared instead, evolving from angry demands to know where he was to thinly veiled threats about police and missing persons reports. Clayton read them all, but replied to none. He didn't block her number that would require engagement. Instead, he simply observed, detached, as though reading about the life of a stranger. 2 weeks after he left, a text from Wyatt appeared. Dad, are you okay? Mom's really mad. When are you coming home? That one nearly broke him. He typed several responses, deleted them all. Finally, I'm okay, buddy. Take care of yourself. We'll talk soon. Then he silenced the phone and went back to work. Through mutual friends on social media, Clayton watched the fallout unfold from a distance. Delilah's posts changed from carefully curated family photos to vague complaints about responsibilities and abandoned commitments. Then came the thinly disguised pleas for financial advice. Finally, desperate requests for job leads. 3 weeks in, Maureen called. Clayton was on his lunch break at the junkyard, sitting on an overturned milk crate, eating a sandwich. Her name on the screen surprised him enough that he answered without thinking. Clayton. Her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. Where are you? Does it matter? A pause. The mortgage payment bounced. The bank called yesterday. Clayton took another bite of his sandwich, chewed thoroughly, swallowed. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate. Maureen's voice rose an octave. Is that all you have to say? What about your family? What about your responsibilities? Why did you stop paying the mortgage? Clayton replied, his tone perfectly, deliberately calm. What? We never. Maureen sputtered, then collected herself. You know very well that's your bill to pay. Your responsibility. I thought I never gave this family anything, Clayton said, the words precise, measured. Isn't that what Delilah said? Nothing that matters. Silence on the other end. Then, you can't possibly be serious. Tell Delilah the mortgage gets paid when the payee shows up at the bank. The account information hasn't changed. He ended the call, turned his phone off, and went back to work. That evening, Clayton walked into the local hardware store and bought a notebook, a stack of financial books, and a calculator. If he was going to build a new life, he needed to be smarter about it than he had been about his old one. The text from Delilah turned vicious after that. Names he'd never heard her use before. Accusations that would have wounded him a month ago, but now bounced off like rain against a window. He listened to each voicemail once, absorbing the escalating panic beneath her rage, then deleted them all. The junkyard. Clayton proved himself invaluable. He could identify valuable parts at a glance, strip an engine in half the time it took the other workers, and never complained about the long hours or dirty conditions. Hank noticed. You ain't never said where you came from, Hank remarked one evening as he counted out Clayton's pay. Nowhere worth mentioning, Clayton replied. Hank nodded, seeming to understand. Got a kid who could use some help with his truck. Transmission's shot. Pay you extra if you're interested. Clayton was. The boy turned out to be Theo, Vernon's 16-year-old grandson. Smart kid, eager to learn. Clayton found himself looking forward to their evening sessions in Vernon's garage, teaching Theo the things his own father had taught him about engines and machinery. 1 month after leaving, Clayton sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and his financial notebook. He had been careful with his money, spending only on necessities. The inheritance remained largely intact, save for whatever came next. His phone buzzed with a text from Delilah. They're repossessing the car tomorrow. Your fault. Clayton sipped his coffee, set the phone aside, and went back to his calculations. The old Clayton might have felt guilty, might have rushed to fix her problems. The new Clayton recognized the manipulation for what it was and felt nothing but a cool, detached pity. That night, he drove to the diner on the edge of town for dinner. He'd become something of a regular there, always choosing the same corner booth, always leaving a generous tip. The owner, a sturdy woman with salt and pepper hair and steady hands, often brought his food personally. You must be the only person in Tennessee who orders meatloaf on purpose, she remarked, setting the plate in front of him. Clayton looked up, met her eyes. Best thing on the menu. That's because I make it. She extended her hand. Naomi Lang. He took it. Clayton Mercer. I know. A small smile. Small town. You're the guy fixing Theo Miller's truck. Clayton nodded, suddenly aware that he was still holding her hand. He let go. Mind if I join you? Breaks in 5 minutes, and eating alone gets old. Clayton hesitated, then gestured to the seat across from him. Be my guest. Naomi returned with her own plate meatloaf as well and settled into the booth. So, she said, pouring ketchup beside her mashed potatoes, you running from something or toward something? Clayton paused, fork halfway to his mouth. What makes you think I'm running? 30 years in the restaurant business. You learn to read people. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. You got that look. Careful, watchful, like you're expecting something to catch up with you. Clayton set his fork down. Both, I guess. Running from and toward. Naomi nodded. That's usually how it works. They ate in companionable silence for a while. It was the most comfortable Clayton had felt around another person in years. Lost my husband 5 years back, Naomi said suddenly. Car accident. Out-of-towner, drunk, crossed the center line. Clayton met her gaze. I'm sorry, she shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both acceptance and the permanent weight of loss. Life happens. You adapt or you drown. I adapted. When Clayton left an hour later, he felt oddly energized. His phone showed 5 new texts from Delilah and 1 from Wyatt. Mom says you're not coming back. Is that true? Clayton pulled over to the side of the road, hands suddenly shaking. The question deserved an honest answer. but he wasn't sure what that answer was yet. Finally, he typed, "I don't know, buddy. But no matter what happens, you and I are going to be okay." He sent the message, then continued home through the darkness. The road ahead unclear, but somehow less intimidating than it had been when he first drove away from Cedar Lane. 6 weeks after Clayton left, the bills began to pile up. Not in his mailbox. He'd barely received any mail at the cabin beyond a local newspaper that Vernon insisted on sharing, but in the digital alerts that still pinged his phone. Credit card payments missed. Utilities marked past due. The second mortgage notice from the bank, this one threatening foreclosure if the account wasn't brought current, that he sat on his porch, scrolling through the notifications with clinical detachment. It was like watching a controlled demolition from a safe distance, fascinating in its systematic collapse, but no longer personally dangerous. Hank T. the junkyard. Clayton had taken on additional responsibilities. Hank trusted him now, let him handle customer transactions, and manage the small crew of part-time workers who came and went. The pay had improved, still cash, still under the table. Clayton saved most of it, adding to his growing nest egg. "Got a proposition for you," Hank said one afternoon, leaning against the hood of a half-stripped Chevy. "My cousin's got a night course at the community college. Accounting for small businesses. Thought you might be interested." Clayton looked up from the transmission he was dismantling. "Why's that?" "Because you're the only one around here who can count past 10 without taking off their shoes," Hank replied dryly. "And because I've seen those books you're always scribbling in during lunch. Man with a plan, that's what you are." That night, Clayton drove to the college and registered for the course. Then he added another basic business management. The semester would start in 3 weeks. Back at the cabin, he found Wyatt had texted again. "The power went out yesterday. Mom's really scared. Grandma keeps crying." Clayton's chest tightened. He hadn't anticipated this, hadn't thought through how his absence would affect his son day to day. He'd been so focused on escaping Delilah's contempt that he'd failed to consider the practical impact on Wyatt. "Did the power come back on?" He texted back, "Yeah. Mom paid something, but she says we might lose the house." Clayton stared at the message for a long time. Then he opened his banking app, navigated to the joint account he shared with Delilah. It showed a balance of $42.17. The savings account was empty. Where had the money gone? He and Delilah together had brought in nearly $5,000 a month. The mortgage was $1,200. Even with utilities, food, and Maureen's medications, they should have had a cushion. He dug deeper, examining the transaction history. Restaurant charges, clothing purchases, online shopping deliveries, salon appointments. The pattern was clear and entirely consistent with how Delilah had always spent money. The difference was that now, his regular deposits weren't there to cover the expenses. After an hour of deliberation, Clayton transferred $500 into the joint account, enough to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator, but not enough to enable Delilah's spending habits. He added a memo to the transfer, for Wyatt's needs only. 10 minutes later, his phone rang Delilah. He let it go to voicemail, then listened. "You miserable, selfish bastard." Her voice was raw, a mixture of fury and desperation. $500? After everything? You think that covers what you owe us? You think that makes up for abandoning your family? Wyatt cries himself to sleep every night because of you. Mom had to borrow money from her church group to pay for her heart medication. And all you can manage is $500 with your little passive-aggressive note. Clayton deleted the message, turned off his phone. He wouldn't be manipulated again. The next day at the diner, Naomi slid into his booth without waiting for an invitation. It had become something of a routine over the past 2 weeks. She took her break when he came in for dinner, and they shared a meal and conversation. "You look like hell," she observed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Rough night," Clayton admitted. "Want to talk about it?" When he hesitated, she added, "Or we can talk about anything else. Weather's been nice. Theo's truck is running again. I'm thinking about adding blueberry pancakes to the menu." Clayton managed a small smile. "The truck's really working, like a charm. Kid's been driving up and down Main Street all day, showing it off to his friends." Naomi studied him. "But that's not what's bothering you." Clayton sighed, ran a hand over his face. "I'm not sure what the right thing to do is anymore." "About my son," Clayton said quietly. "I left him. Understanding dawned in Naomi's eyes. Ah, so that's what you're running from. A family. Not exactly. Clayton struggled to find the words. I left my wife and her mother, but my son got caught in the crossfire. How old is he? 12. Naomi nodded slowly. Old enough to understand something's wrong. Not old enough to understand everything. Exactly. Clayton pushed his food around his plate. His mother is struggling financially. I sent some money, but it's complicated. Complicated how? Clayton looked up, met her steady gaze. She told me I never gave them anything, that I was a taker. So I left to show her exactly what I'd been giving all along. And now I'm watching it all fall apart from a distance. And I'm not sure if I'm teaching her a lesson or just being cruel. Naomi reached across the table, placed her hand over his. Then that's your answer. Whatever else happens, whatever else you decide, that boy needs to know his father loves him. Clayton nodded, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. Thank you. That night, Clayton sent a text to Wyatt. I miss you, buddy. I'm working some things out. It may take a while, but I promise we'll see each other soon. 3 days later, the car was repossessed. Clayton learned about it through Facebook, where Delilah had posted a thinly veiled plea for rides to job interviews. The comment section was filled with sympathetic friends offering help and asking what had happened to Clayton. That Delilah's response made his blood boil. He abandoned us without warning. Left me and Wyatt with nothing. Nothing. There was that word again. He closed the app, fighting the urge to respond publicly. It wouldn't help. Nothing would help except time and the natural consequences of her actions. That evening, Theo stopped by the cabin, proudly driving his restored truck. Mr. Hank said you might be able to help me with something else, the teenager said, leaning against the hood. Got an offer to help old man Pritchard with his landscaping business this summer. But I need to learn how engines work, for the mowers and stuff. Clayton found himself agreeing to regular tutoring sessions. Twice a week, he and Theo would work on small engines in Vernon's garage, with Clayton teaching and Theo absorbing everything like a sponge. You're good with him, Vernon remarked one evening as they watched Theo drive away. Got a way of explaining things that make sense. Clayton shrugged. He's a good kid. Makes it easy. Got one of your own? The question caught Clayton off guard. Yeah, boy, Wyatt. Vernon nodded. Thought so. You got that look when you're showing Theo something. Like you're saving it up to show someone else someday. The observation hit closer to home than Vernon could have known. 1 month after Clayton left, Maureen called again. It was early morning, and he was sitting on the porch with his coffee, watching the sun burn away the mist that clung to the hills. That he answered on the third ring. Yes. Why did you stop paying the mortgage? Maureen's voice was thick with tears. They're going to take the house, Clayton. They're going to put us out on the street. Clayton took a sip of his coffee. I didn't stop paying the mortgage, Maureen. I stopped giving Delilah money to pay the mortgage. There's a difference. What does that even mean? The result is the same. Is it? Clayton kept his tone neutral. What happened to the money I was bringing in every month? What happened to Delilah's paycheck from the insurance office? You're telling me that between the two of you, you couldn't come up with $1,200 for the mortgage? Silence, then a muffled sob. Things have been tight since you left. Delilah lost her job. She's been too upset to work. That sounds like a choice, Clayton replied. I made mine. She made hers. How can you be so cold? After everything we've done for you. There was again that claim of invisible contributions that somehow outweighed his years of steady work and financial support. Thought I never gave this family anything, Clayton replied, the words calm but cutting. More silence. Then, you can't just abandon your responsibilities. What about Wyatt? What about him? Clayton's grip tightened on his coffee mug. Has he gone hungry? Has he missed school? Has he lacked for anything in the past month that I didn't immediately provide money for when asked? He needs his father, and his father needs a son who isn't being taught that he's worthless. Clayton stood, moved to the edge of the porch. Tell Delilah I'll be in touch about Wyatt. As for the rest of it, you made your bed. Both of you. He ended the call, set his phone on silent, and went inside to get ready for work at the junkyard. Clayton threw himself into physical labor, stripping engines and hauling scrap metal until his muscles burned and his mind quieted. Hank watched him with concern, but said nothing. That evening, the text from Delilah began to pour in. a torrent of rage and accusation. He was cruel, heartless, a monster who cared about nothing but his own selfish needs. She had given him the best years of her life, and this was how he repaid her. On and on, message after message, each one more desperate than the last. Clayton read them all, absorbing the fury like a man watching a thunderstorm from inside a sturdy house. When the final message came, "I hope you're out in hell," he typed a single response: "I'll send money for Wyatt every week. The rest is up to you." Then he blocked her number. Wyatt, however, could still reach him. That night, a text arrived: "Mom's really mad at you. She threw your clothes in the yard and burned some of your stuff." Clayton winced. "Are you okay, buddy?" "I guess. Grandma says we have to move soon. Mom keeps crying when she thinks I can't hear." A wave of guilt washed over Clayton. Not for Delilah or Maureen, but for his son caught in this mess. "I'm sorry, Wyatt. This isn't your fault. None of it. When are you coming home?" The question hung there, unanswerable in its simplicity that I don't know yet. "But I promise we'll see each other soon." "Okay. I miss you." Clayton's eyes burned. "I miss you too, buddy. More than you know." 2 months stretched into 3. The seasons began to change, summer heat giving way to the first crisp hints of fall. Clayton established a routine that felt, if not comfortable, at least sustainable. Mornings at the junkyard. Evenings at the community college, where he'd become known as the quiet, intense student who always sat in the front row and asked the most practical questions. Weekends split between odd jobs around town and helping Theo with increasingly complex mechanical projects. The money continued to accumulate. Clayton lived simply, spending only on necessities and his education. Each week, he sent funds for Wyatt through a newly established digital account that his son could access directly, an arrangement that had come after learning Delilah had been intercepting his previous contributions. "You're different," Naomi observed one evening in the diner. Their dinner conversations had become the highlight of Clayton's week, a chance to talk with someone who expected nothing from him except honesty. "Different how?" he asked, cutting into his meatloaf. "Lighter." She gestured vaguely at him. "When you first started coming in here, you had this weight on you. It's still there, but it's not crushing you anymore." Clayton considered this. "I'm learning to carry it differently, I guess. Or learning to set some of it down." Naomi sipped her coffee. "Heard you started classes at the college." News traveled fast in small towns. "Basic accounting, business management. Planning to stick around then?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. "Maybe," Clayton replied. "Depends on a few things." "Your son?" Clayton nodded. "Among others." Naomi seemed to hesitate, then plunged ahead. "You never talk about her." "Your wife." "Ex-wife, eventually." "What happened?" "If you don't mind me asking." Clayton set down his fork, chose his words carefully. "We wanted different things. I wanted stability, security. She wanted more than I could give, I guess, or thought I was giving. And now I'm trying to build something new, something that's mine." Their conversation was interrupted by Clayton's phone buzzing. A text from Wyatt. "We're moving to Grandma's sister's place next week. Mom says I might have to change schools." Clayton frowned. "Where does your aunt live?" "Nashville. Mom says there's more jobs there." "Nashville. 3 hours away. Far enough to make regular visits difficult." "Let me see what I can do," Clayton texted back. "Bad news?" Naomi asked, noting his expression. "My wife is planning to move my son to Nashville." Naomi's eyes widened slightly. "Could she do that? Legally, I mean." "I don't know." Clayton ran a hand through his hair. "We don't have any formal custody arrangement. I just left. Might be time to talk to a lawyer." The next day, he approached Hank with a question. "You know any good lawyers around here?" Hank looked up from the engine he was examining. "What kind of trouble you in?" "Custody issue." Understanding dawned on Hank's weathered face. "Ernie Brax. Over in Clinton. Best family lawyer in 3 counties. Owes me a favor, too." 2 days later, Clayton sat in Ernie Brax's cluttered office. Ernie was a small man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, who cut straight to the heart of things. "So you left the marital home without a formal separation agreement, have been sending money for your son, but not your wife, and now she's planning to relocate with the child to Nashville?" Ernie summarized, making notes on a legal pad. Clayton nodded. "That's about it." Any documentation of the financial support you've been providing? Bank records. I can show you the transfers. Good. And how much is in your separate account now? The one your wife doesn't know about. Clayton hesitated, then answered truthfully. Ernie whistled. That's a decent nest egg. And you've been working where? Hank's salvage. Cash payments. Ernie frowned. Not ideal from a documentation standpoint, but we can work with it. Any other income or assets I should know about? Clayton thought of his father's land, 80 acres of apparently worthless woodland that he'd inherited along with the small insurance payment. He'd never done anything with it, considering it more of a liability than an asset due to the annual property taxes. There's some land, he said slowly. My father's property. It's not worth much. Where is it? Clayton told him. Ernie's eyebrows shot up. You're joking. No. Why? Because the county approved a new highway interchange last month. Right through that area. They're buying up land at premium prices for the right-of-way. Clayton stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying, Ernie replied with a growing smile, that your worthless property might be worth quite a lot now. And timing, my friend, is everything. Over the next few weeks, Clayton worked closely with Ernie to navigate the complex world of right-of-way acquisitions and property valuations. The county's initial offer for the land, $42,000, was rejected outright on Ernie's advice. That'd be why the time the third offer arrived, $280,000, Clayton could hardly believe the numbers on the page. This is real? He asked Ernie, who was smirking with satisfaction. Very real, and very much in your favor. Ernie slid the paperwork across his desk. Sign here, and you'll be a wealthy man by this time next week. As instructed, Clayton opened a new bank account in his name only, separate from any joint accounts he had shared with Delilah. The money minus Ernie's reasonable fee was deposited directly. That night, sitting on his cabin porch, Clayton looked out at the hills with new eyes. Everything had changed, yet nothing had. He was still the same man, still living in the same small cabin, still working at the junkyard. But now, for the first time in his adult life, he had options. His phone buzzed with a text from Wyatt. We're leaving Friday. Mom says I don't have to start the new school right away. Clayton texted back immediately. Don't worry, buddy. I'm working on something. Trust me, okay? Okay, Dad. I trust you. The simple faith in those words both warmed and terrified Clayton. He wouldn't let his son down. Not again. The next day, Clayton gave Hank 2 weeks' notice. Figured this was coming, Hank said with a resigned nod. You're too smart for this junkyard. Always were. I appreciate everything, Clayton replied, meaning it. You gave me a chance when I needed one. What's next for you? Clayton smiled slightly. I'm going home. The divorce papers arrived at Delilah's sister's apartment in Nashville on a Tuesday morning. Clayton knew because Wyatt texted him immediately. Mom just got some papers. She's crying and yelling on the phone with Grandma. What's happening, Dad? Clayton sat in Ernie Brax's office, his lawyer across from him reviewing final documents. It's okay, buddy. These are things adults have to work out sometimes. Don't worry. Your wife's attorney called, Ernie said, looking up from his computer. They want to discuss a settlement. Already? Clayton raised an eyebrow. The papers were just delivered. Ernie's thin lips curved into a smile. They ran a financial search. Standard procedure in divorce cases. Found your new account with the highway money. Now they're interested in talking. Clayton nodded, unsurprised. And what will they ask for? Half. Ernie replied promptly. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state. Since the land came from your father before the marriage, they'll argue that the proceeds should be considered marital property because you managed it during the marriage. Did I? Clayton asked. Manage it, I mean? Ernie's smile widened. Funny thing about that. There's no record of any development, improvement, or management of that land during your marriage. You paid the taxes, nothing more. And the county's interest came after you separated. Timing, as I said, is everything. 2 days later, Clayton sat across from Delilah for the first time in nearly 4 months. Her attorney, a sleek woman in an expensive suit, sat beside her. Ernie represented Clayton. The conference room in the law offices felt too small, too warm. Delilah looked thinner than Clayton remembered, the angles of her face sharper. Her eyes, when they met his, held pure hatred. Let's cut to the chase, her attorney began. My client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the proceeds from the land sale. Ernie cleared his throat. My client respectfully disagrees. The land was premarital property, never developed during the marriage, and its value was realized post-separation. Mr. Mercer abandoned the family home without notice, Delilah's attorney countered. He cut off financial support, causing significant hardship to Mrs. Mercer and their son. Bank records indicate otherwise, Ernie replied, sliding a folder across the table. My client has made regular payments for his son's support. As for Mrs. Mercer, she stated quite clearly that my client had never contributed anything of value to the family. We're simply acknowledging her perspective. Furthermore, Ernie continued smoothly, we have evidence that Mrs. Mercer misused joint funds and forged Mr. Mercer's signature on tax documents for the past 3 years. The room went silent. Delilah's attorney frowned, turning to her client with a questioning look. I don't know what he's talking about, Delilah said quickly. Ernie slid another folder across the table. Tax returns for 2022, 2023, and 2024. The signatures purporting to be Mr. Mercer's are forgeries. We've had them analyzed by an expert. Additionally, there are checks written to Mrs. Mercer's mother from the joint account, signed with Mr. Mercer's name, but not by Mr. Mercer. Delilah's attorney flipped through the documents, her expression darkening. We'll need to confer privately. Of course, Ernie agreed pleasantly. Take all the time you need. Clayton remained silent throughout the exchange, watching Delilah's confidence crumble as the evidence mounted. When she and her attorney returned after a tense 15-minute consultation, her demeanor had changed entirely. We're prepared to discuss a more reasonable arrangement, her attorney announced. The final settlement was straightforward. Clayton kept the proceeds from the land sale and his personal savings. Delilah received the house on Cedar Lane, which had been worth something before the missed mortgage payments, but was now approaching foreclosure. A modest monthly support payment will be provided for Wyatt, paid directly into an account managed by a neutral third party to ensure the funds were used as intended. As they prepared to leave, Delilah finally addressed Clayton directly. You planned this, she hissed, voice low enough that only he could hear. You knew about the highway deal when you left. Clayton met her gaze calmly. No, Delilah, I didn't plan anything. I just stopped fixing your mistakes. Her eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. This isn't over. Actually, Clayton replied, gathering his papers, it is. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the Campbell County Family Court. Clayton arrived early, dressed in a new suit that Naomi had helped him select. Ernie met him at the courthouse steps. Ready? Clayton nodded. How's it look? Honest answer. It's a toss-up. Mothers typically have an advantage in these cases, especially with a child Wyatt's age. But we've got solid evidence of financial instability on her part, and your situation has improved dramatically. Ernie patted his briefcase. Plus, I've got a few surprises in here. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Clayton had imagined. Delilah and her attorney were already seated at one table. Maureen sat in the gallery behind them, her thin face pinched with anxiety. Clayton and Ernie took their places at the opposite table. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, entered, and proceedings began. Delilah's case went first. Her attorney painted a picture of a devoted mother struggling to recover from abandonment by her husband. Yes, there had been financial difficulties, but those were directly caused by Clayton's abrupt departure. Delilah had sought employment, was currently working as an administrative assistant at an insurance office in Nashville, and had secured stable housing with family support nearby. And what does Mrs. Mercer request in terms of custody? The judge asked. Full physical custody, Your Honor, with standard visitation rights for the father. The judge made a note, then turned to Ernie. Mr. Brax. Ernie stood. Your Honor, we're requesting primary physical custody of Wyatt Mercer be awarded to his father, with liberal visitation for the mother. On what grounds? The judge asked. Stability, Your Honor. Mr. Mercer has purchased a home in his son's original school district. He has steady income and significant savings. Most importantly, Ernie paused for effect. He has demonstrated consistent concern for his son's welfare even during the separation, while Mrs. Mercer has demonstrated a pattern of prioritizing her own needs above the child's. The judge reviewed the documents. These are concerning but not definitive, Mr. Brax. Do you have anything else? Yes, Your Honor. Ernie hesitated, glancing at Clayton, who nodded. We've requested that Wyatt Mercer be allowed to express his own preference directly to the court. Given his age and maturity level, we believe his voice should be heard in this matter. The judge considered this. He's 12, correct? Yes, Your Honor. I'll speak with him in chambers. Alone. Delilah half rose from her seat. I object. He's just a child. Clayton has probably been manipulating him, telling him what to say. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said sharply, that's enough. The court will determine what weight to give to the child's preferences. The judge nodded to the bailiff, who left to fetch Wyatt. Clayton watched his son enter the courtroom, heart pounding. Wyatt had grown taller in the months since he'd seen him last. His hair was longer, his face thinner. He looked nervous but determined that Wyatt's eyes found Clayton's. A small, uncertain smile flickered across the boy's face. Clayton nodded encouragingly. The judge spoke gently to Wyatt, explaining that they would talk privately in her chambers. As they left, Delilah called out, "Remember what we talked about, sweetie." The minutes that followed were the longest of Clayton's life. He sat rigidly in his chair, aware of Delilah's glares from across the room, of Maureen's muttered prayers, of Ernie's steady presence beside him. When the judge and Wyatt returned, the boy's expression was calm. He was escorted back out of the courtroom by the bailiff. The judge resumed her seat, reviewed her notes, then looked up at the assembled parties. I've heard enough to make a preliminary determination, she announced. Based on the evidence presented in my conversation with Wyatt Mercer, I am awarding primary physical custody to Clayton Mercer with weekend visitation rights for Delilah Mercer. The words hung in the air for a moment before Delilah's outraged cry shattered the silence. This is ridiculous. He abandoned us. He left us with nothing. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said sternly, control yourself or you'll be held in contempt. You don't understand, Delilah continued, voice rising. He planned this. He set us up to fail. Ask our neighbors how he treated us. The judge's eyebrows rose. As it happens, Mrs. Mercer, the court has received affidavits from 3 of your former neighbors on Cedar Lane. Would you like me to read them into the record? Delilah fell silent, confusion replacing anger. These statements, the judge continued, describe frequent shouting from the Mercer residents, primarily a female voice. They mention a quiet, hard-working husband and an increasingly unstable wife. One neighbor specifically recalls, and I quote, hearing Mrs. Mercer scream that her husband had never given the family anything of value and that he should leave if he had any pride left. Clayton felt no satisfaction as Delilah's face crumpled. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about Wyatt. Furthermore, the judge added, Wyatt himself has expressed a clear preference to live with his father. He describes a home environment with his mother that has become scary and unpredictable. He's lying, Delilah whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. The judge ignored this. The court will issue temporary orders today, with a review in 6 months. Mr. Mercer will have primary physical custody effective immediately. After the hearing, Clayton found Wyatt waiting with Naomi in the hallway. The boy stood as his father approached, uncertainty written across his face. Hey, buddy, Clayton said softly. Wyatt hesitated for a moment, then rushed forward, throwing his arms around Clayton's waist. I missed you, Dad. Clayton held his son tightly, throat too tight for words. Over Wyatt's shoulder, he saw Delilah watching them, her face a mask of defeat and hatred. Maureen stood beside her, one hand on her daughter's arm, whispering urgently. They turned and walked away without another word. Ernie approached, briefcase in hand. One more thing, Clayton. I filed a lien against the Cedar Lane house for the unpaid mortgage debt and credit card balances that were in your name. Given the foreclosure proceedings, it's unlikely to yield much, but it will prevent Delilah or Maureen from selling the property without settling those debts first. Clayton nodded. Thank you. For everything. With Ernie's departure, Clayton turned to Naomi, who had been quietly observing from a respectful distance. "Thank you for bringing him," he said. She smiled. "It was my pleasure. He's a great kid." Wyatt looked between them, curious. "Are you Dad's girlfriend?" Naomi laughed, a warm sound that echoed in the austere hallway. "No, honey, just a friend. A good friend." Clayton felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who had appeared in his life at exactly the right moment. "A very good friend," he amended. The small house on Maple Street was nothing like the home on Cedar Lane. It was older, with worn hardwood floors and outdated fixtures, but it had good bones and was within walking distance of Wyatt's school. Most importantly, it was only 2 blocks from Naomi's diner. Clayton and Wyatt spent the first weekend painting, replacing light fixtures, and making the space their own. The boys' room came first: blue walls, a new desk for homework, bookshelves filled with science books and model rockets. "Dad," Wyatt asked as they assembled his bed, "are we going to be okay?" Clayton paused, a screwdriver in his hand. "Yeah, buddy, we're going to be more than okay." "Is Mom going to be okay?" "Your mom is going through a tough time," Clayton said carefully. "But she's strong. She'll figure things out." The transition wasn't without challenges. Wyatt had nightmares the first few weeks, waking up disoriented and calling out. Clayton would sit with him until he fell back asleep, sometimes reading aloud from one of the space books until the boys' breathing became deep and regular. School was another hurdle. Wyatt had missed nearly a month during the move to Nashville and back. His grades had slipped, his normally quiet demeanor had become almost mute, and his teachers expressed concern about his emotional state. Clayton took a day off from his new job at the local auto parts store to meet with Wyatt's teachers and counselor. Together, they developed a plan to help Wyatt catch up academically and process the upheaval in his life. Weekends became a special time for father and son. They explored the local state park, built model rockets, and worked on small engines in the garage, skills that Clayton had learned from his own father and now passed on to Wyatt. The first visitation weekend with Delilah arrived with trepidation from both Mercers. Delilah had found an apartment back in town, a small one-bedroom that she could barely afford on her new salary as a receptionist at a medical office. "Do I have to go?" Wyatt asked that Friday morning, pushing his cereal around the bowl. "Your mom misses you," Clayton replied, choosing his words with care. "And it's important for you to spend time with her. But what if she says bad things about you?" Clayton sat beside his son at the kitchen table. "Then you listen politely and remember that sometimes grown-ups say things when they're hurt that they don't really mean." When Delilah arrived to pick up Wyatt, the exchange was civil but cold. She had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. She didn't meet Clayton's gaze, focusing entirely on Wyatt. "Ready, sweetie? I've got your favorite pizza waiting at the apartment." Wyatt nodded, giving Clayton a quick hug before climbing into Delilah's car, an older model than the one that had been repossessed, clearly purchased used. The weekend without Wyatt stretched before Clayton like a desert. To fill the time, he drove to the local community college and enrolled in additional business courses. Then he visited the county clerk's office to inquire about the requirements for opening a small business. That evening, he found himself at Naomi's diner. The dinner rush was over, and she joined him in his usual booth with a cup of coffee. "Quiet without him, isn't it?" she observed. Clayton nodded. "Too quiet. He'll be back before you know it." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "Meanwhile, you look like a man with a plan." "Maybe." Clayton hesitated, then pushed a folder across the table. "What do you think of this?" Naomi opened it, scanned the business proposal inside. "Mercer's Mechanics," she read aloud. "Small engine repair and service." "It's just an idea," Clayton said quickly. "But I've been thinking about what Theo said months ago, that I should open my own shop. There's nothing like it in town, and with my experience, I think it's brilliant," Naomi interrupted. "And the location you're looking at, that old garage on Washington Street? Perfect." Over the following months, a new normal emerged. Clayton's business plan took shape, with a small loan from the bank supplemented by his own savings. He leased a garage on Washington Street, purchased equipment, and hired Theo Miller part-time to help on weekends. Mercer's Mechanics opened in the spring. The first week brought a trickle of customers, mostly friends of Vernon and Hank, who came to show support. By the third week, word had spread about the quality of Clayton's work and his fair prices. The appointment calendar began to fill. Wyatt thrived in the stability of their new life. His grades improved, he joined the science club at school, and he spent Saturday mornings at the shop, learning from his father just as Theo had. The 6-month custody review came and went without incident. The judge noted Wyatt's improved academic performance and emotional state, commented favorably on Clayton's stable employment and housing situation, and made the custody arrangement permanent. Delilah, who had appeared in court alone, Maureen, having moved to a trailer park outside of town after being evicted from the Cedar Lane house, accepted the decision with quiet resignation. She had aged visibly in the months since the divorce, the bitterness etching permanent lines around her mouth as they left the courthouse. She caught Clayton's arm. "I need to talk to you." He gestured for Wyatt to wait by the car, then turned to face her. "What is it?" "I can't afford the apartment anymore," she said, voice low. "The medical office is cutting back hours. I'm going to have to move in with Mom at the trailer park." Clayton waited, sensing there was more. "I can't have Wyatt there," she continued, eyes fixed on the ground. It's not a good environment. The neighbors, the conditions." She took a deep breath. "I want to amend the visitation schedule. I'll take him 1 weekend a month instead of 2. It's all I can manage right now." Clayton studied the woman he had once loved, searching for some remnant of the vibrant, ambitious girl he had married. She had disappeared entirely, replaced by this hollow-eyed stranger. "If that's what you think is best," he said finally, "we can have Ernie draw up the papers." Delilah nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Clayton found himself asking, "Are you going to be all right, Delilah?" She paused, looking back at him with a bitter smile. "Since when do you care?" "I don't wish you ill," he replied honestly. "Despite everything." "Save your concern," she said. "I'll survive. I always do." On a crisp fall day, almost exactly 1 year after he had first driven away from Cedar Lane, Clayton visited his father's grave. The small cemetery was peaceful, golden leaves drifting down from the surrounding maples. He brushed away accumulated debris from the simple headstone. Edward James Mercer, 1954 to 2019, beloved father. Clayton placed a single wrench on the granite marker, his father's favorite tool, worn smooth by decades of use. "I fixed it, Dad," he said quietly to the stone, "just like you taught me. Identified the problem, found the right tools, and fixed it." The wind rustled through the trees, nature's only reply. The evening air had a crisp edge to it as Clayton and Naomi sat on the wooden bench outside her diner. The closed sign hung in the window, but they lingered, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. "Wyatt get off to his mother's okay?" Naomi asked, sipping from a steaming mug of coffee. Clayton nodded. "Yeah, just the one night this time. Her new job at the factory has weekend shifts." "And how's he handling all that?" "Better than I expected." Clayton stretched his legs out before him, feeling the pleasant ache of a day spent working with his hands. Kids adapt. He knows the routine now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that can only exist between two people who have no need to fill every moment with words. In the years since Clayton had returned to town, their friendship had deepened into something more, not quite romance, but something equally valuable. Understanding, mutual respect, the potential for more when they were both ready. "Her Maureen's moving to Florida," Naomi said eventually. "Her sister found her a place in one of those senior communities." "Good for her," Clayton replied without irony. "Fresh start might be what she needs." Naomi studied him over the rim of her mug. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do." Clayton watched a car drive slowly down Main Street, its headlights catching the first fallen leaves of autumn. "She's Wyatt's grandmother. I want her to be okay." "What about Delilah?" The question hung in the air between them. Clayton considered it carefully. "Delilah made her choices," he said finally. "Just like I made mine." Naomi set her mug down on the bench beside her. "You ever going to forgive them?" "Either of them." Clayton turned to look at her directly, his expression calm but resolute. "I didn't come back to forgive. I came back to finish what they started." "And have you?" "Finished it." He thought about the thriving business he'd built, about the home he'd created for Wyatt, about the quiet dignity he'd reclaimed. "Almost," he replied. "There's still work to do." There always is, Naomi said with a small smile. That's life. Clayton reached over, took her hand in his. Her fingers were warm from the coffee mug, strong and capable, like the woman herself. Thank you, he said, for being there. Through all of it. That's what friends do, she replied simply. Is that what we are? Friends. The question came out before he could consider its implications. Naomi squeezed his hand. For now. The rest, well, we've got time to figure that out. The last light of day faded from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening blue. Clayton felt a peace settle over him, not the easy peace of problems avoided, but the earned peace of challenges faced and overcome. It was a ruthless kind of peace, bought with difficult decisions and hard boundaries. But it was real, and it was his. Together, they watched night fall over the town they both called home, two people who had learned the hard way that some things must be broken before they can be truly fixed.